Welcome to our first VIADUCT Webcast. My name is Zeynep Taştekin. I'm in final year in my master's, and here I would like to ask Professor Wessels a few questions about how to write a master thesis.
Welcome to our kind of dialogue, which we hope do like the good old Socrates did in former Athens time. Okay, let's go ahead. Welcome to our short dialogue, which we are going to have. And perhaps you start with your problem. What is your problem? What are your challenges?
Okay, first of all, thank you for taking the time. Right now, I'm in my final year of my master program, and I'm about to write my master thesis. And that's why I wanted to have this chat with you, talking about my problems and the issues I would like to address when writing my thesis.
Okay, so what is your topic? And how do you find your topic? What is, let's say, your motivation to write on what?
Yeah, that's exactly my problem right now. I have like so many interests, and right now I'm trying to specialize on one. For example, I did my bachelor's in European Studies, and I would like to focus on the EU and its institutions, for example. That's like what the European Union is actually my issue, or my topic I'm passionate about.
I understand that, because the EU is of high political and academic relevance for all of us. In the day-to-day life, it goes deep into what we are doing each day and the rules we have in our society and economy and political life. And secondly, it's changing each day. We have now something like the Brexit. That's the topic of our background program, the relations with Turkey, which changes quite often, which is of high relevance. And therefore, it's interesting to go ahead with studying major parts, or a crucial, central, vital part of this EU.
Exactly.
Do you have any additional starting points, motivations?
Yeah, for example, like also your specialty, maybe the European Council would be like of a high interest to me. But my problem is actually that I can't really find a research problem. Like, what is really like the issue I would like to dig deeper into? Like, that's not what I feel that everything has already been discussed and research, and I can't really find the gap I can fit into.
Yeah. Okay, this is one of the problems we all have. Is there a gap? And if I look at research proposals, quite a lot of my colleagues always write about a large research gap. And if you know the literature a little bit, you realize the research gap is not as large as people think it is. So don't be shy, or don't be afraid that you might take up points which are already studied to a certain degree. In the EU, one of the interesting points, and on the European Council, is that there are each year new developments. So you might take quite a lot of your original, or of the original academic state of the art, what the academic community has written about the European Council, and then look what is new perhaps, or what has changed, or perhaps what has not changed. So what are continuities, discontinuities of the European Council, and to look at that, there are different perspectives, of course. One is legitimacy. How democratic is the European Council with the heads of state or government of all member states? Of course, each one of them has a certain legitimacy because they were elected from their voters back home in the member states. But at the same time, they don't have any transparency. It's, let's say, a secretive meeting behind closed doors. Or you might look how important was the European Council in the history of the European Union. Then you would look more at certain crucial events, like the crisis in the last 10 years, or German unification, or dealing with the EU budget. So let's say, look at what has been written. I think that's one of the major points. Look at the literature, review the literature. Don't be afraid that you think everything has been said already. No, not everything, but much has been said. So please, let's say, take what is there, but then start to think what might be new in the sense of, for example, the last 2 years, or why do you think some people have raised questions which were not yet answered?
Okay, so what do you think is the perfect time to start thinking about the thesis topic?
Early.
Early?
The sooner you start, when you start your studies, you should start thinking about it. Not that each night and each day, but that you follow and witness what is happening around this kind of topic. And then you select, in modern times you put that somewhere on your computer. I, in former times, had a special part of my library where I put all those things in. So let's say, don't stop or don't say, I start only now, or only in 2 months' time. But you should start before, and you will find out that this subject is then in your head, and you develop certain kind of considerations without perhaps necessarily forcing yourself. So look at that, start reading. My suggestion is, as soon as you become serious, to work on your subject each day. Not too long necessarily, because you have other things to do too. But don't say, oh, only in my holidays I'm going to start, or in 2 months' time I might have find time. No, that's not the right proposal. Each day, that's at least my working style, you should read something, you should put notes down, you should start to think, that might be an issue I'm more interested in. Then you check the literature, what you can find there.
Exactly. And you also get more aware of the topic the sooner you start. Maybe you can find like connections between topics you haven't found before. So if I have my research problem now, how can I develop from this research problem my research question, which is like more like a sentence with a question mark, not just a problem in general. Yeah. How can I develop this one?
One issue is of major importance, that when you see your topic, your research problem, the field of your studies, you should see that you formulate one research question, only one. Because normally you start to have a couple of research questions. I know that from my own articles, writing my own articles, I have always so many different perspectives that this might be interesting, this might be, but that doesn't help you. So you should try to focus one research question. You might then have sub-questions. That's, of course, possible. One of the questions always is, what kind of questions you should raise? Exactly. So how, what? I normally like to have the question of why. This assumes that there is a causal relationship.
Exactly.
That the European Council, for example, because they are heads of state and government, the political leaders of member states, that they have a special importance. So the why question would be the political power, national political power of the politicians, the members of the European Council, will help the European Council to get to major decisions. So the why question would be very important, and you see directly one answer to the why question. The why does the European Council get to decisions of major importance for member states? And the answer, or preliminary answer, hypothesis, claim would be that you argue, yes, it's because there all political leaders of member states and of 2 EU institutions are there. So it's a collection of political power which might get to decision. You will find out that this is not always the case. This kind of hypothesis claim needs to be proven or tested, and sometimes you will find out, no, even though there are so many important political figures, they don't find consensus.
And is it also possible for me to have multiple claims to one question, or should I just focus on one claim throughout the whole field?
That's, let's say, a little bit, if you have one claim, you have already a counterclaim in mind. If you say because of the power of political persons, then you say, oh, perhaps this power is not so important. My question is always, I'm suggesting to have a black and white claim. It's black or white, and the answer is gray. It's a little bit that, a little bit that. So let's say, don't try to be only refuting or falsifying or verifying one point, but look at the counter argument. So I like always that you find arguments pro and contra, or perhaps sometimes you even have 3 possible answers and counter arguments for these 3 different points.
Talked about like that I should have methods to refuse or to confirm this claim. Which method should I use? Is it just like how should I go on there?
Yeah, the first point is, what kind of sources do you have?
Exactly. Yeah.
So the first question would be, you have a question, and you have a preliminary answer to the question out of the literature. What kind of sources, what kind of empirical evidence can you find for this and this? And let's say the European Council is in this sense not a good example, because you have very few quantifiable data. Whereas, for example, elections to the European Parliament, voting in the European Parliament, voting in the Council, you have a lot of data which you can use, and use statistical methods to look at that. European Council, you need more or less to rely on qualitative methods, on oral evidence, if you might call that oral interviews evidence, but you have to look what is the subject and what are methods which you can deal with. Especially if you write a master's thesis, you are not writing a PhD thesis. A PhD thesis, you would expect that the researcher will really deeply get into it. A master's thesis, you shouldn't spend more than a couple of months on that. So you need to be aware that there are limits to what you can find. But quite often you see in most EU issues, there's a lot of literature which you can draw from. In the case of European Council, look at the texts of the conclusions, or if you look at the European Parliament, or if you look at our subject, EU-Turkey, what are the formal agreements between Turkey and the EU? What are the legal basis for writing this? So there's a lot of things around, and you need to reflect very carefully about the methods you can use, both in terms of what is available, but also in terms of your timing. That you cannot make, for example, in the master's thesis, interviews in all 28 capitals. That's not possible. So you need to be careful about what you can do. And in your method part, you should then tell the reader that you base your own findings on a limited set of sources. And the reader will directly recognize, yes, that's useful. It's limited, but it's useful.
So we talked about literature review. How should I proceed in this one? Like, should I just collect and read everything I can find on the internet or in the library? Or how should I feel so overwhelmed when seeing all the scholars talking about it, writing about it? How should I proceed there?
Yeah, it's a little bit like when you enter in a room where a lot of people talking to each other and you are new and fresh. Okay, you have to follow some of them. Yeah, you have to find what might be a major line of argument and what might be a main set of assumptions, a main set of ideas. So I think at the beginning you need quite to read a lot. Half of them later on will be in vain. But the famous sentence is half I don't need to use, but which half? I don't know before. So it's always a half later on which you see. So at the beginning I think you should have a broader perspective, but then realize there are certain basic assumptions, there are schools of thought, there are theoretical mainstreams to which you can then refer to, perhaps not taking up necessarily the mainstream, but at least referring to the mainstream. I think that's very important, that you realize what is being thought in the academic community, not necessarily to copy it or to take it up word by word, but to relate your own thinking to it.
Okay, let's say I have collected all my information. I have found my research problem, I have found my research question, I've analyzed my data, but how can I structure my thesis the best possible way?
Yeah, it's as we said before, you should start with your research question. Why is this relevant in terms of political constellation, in terms of academic constellation? Is there something like an added value for your research question? You must be careful and not to be too ambitious, because quite often the added value is limited. You should be aware of that. Nobody reinvents the wheel necessarily. But at least that's the starting point. So what is the relevance of your research question and why do you study that? You bring in your motivation, you bring in the constellation of your thesis. Why do you deal with the European Council now? Why do you deal now with EU-Turkey relationship in a moving situation, and why do you think you can contribute to the thinking about it? So that would be a starting point. So define and then explain the research question. And the next thing would be to look for answers to the research question. That would be the claims, the hypothesis. They should be based on the academic literature. So following this and this assumption in the literature, then you will find, you would expect that this and this happens. So if you follow intergovernmental approaches, you would expect that the European Council is a dominating body, institution, the European Union. If you follow geopolitics between Turkey and the EU, you would expect that for both sides. Turkey is important for the EU, and EU is important for Turkey. So this is a very general starting point, but it's good to look what means geopolitics in this context, or what means intergovernmental cooperation in this context. So define the terms you use in your hypothesis. That's, I think, it's very important.
Is that the part of the main part of my thesis, definitions, or should I just do it in the introduction, or how?
That sometimes depends a little bit on how you want to do it. Okay. You might do it in a larger introduction. You might also have a special chapter on theories and methods, because you also need to explain your methods. How do you want to answer your questions based on the hypothesis? How do you want to react to the hypothesis? How do you want to verify or falsify it?
Okay. Okay, so we talked about the introduction of my thesis, about addressing my research problem, about formulating my research question and my claim. How do I proceed from there? How can I start? How can I start the main part?
Yeah, the main part normally should be what we call empirical evidence. So you find data, sources, arguments for or against your hypothesis. You should be carefully watching it, because quite often the main part is not really taking up the research question. I find sometimes there are long parts on history of the relation between EU and Turkey, or the history of the European Council, which is not irrelevant, totally irrelevant, but doesn't answer your question necessarily. So you must be careful that the arguments which you have presented at the beginning, in the introduction or in the theory part, should also be taken up in the main part, in the empirical part. So the terms should come up. You should really work with your theoretical framework in the theory, in the empirical part.
What is important for the conclusion of my thesis?
Yeah. For the conclusion, the term directly indicates you should conclude and not open necessarily new perspectives. So the major part is to give answers to your research question. Yeah, this was a research question based on the empirical evidence I collected. My answer is this and that. And as I said before, quite often you would say it's a little bit that, a little bit that. So it's not black or white, it's gray, but the shades of gray are of course quite important. So that would be a good idea to formulate in this sense. To a certain degree, this proves this, empirical evidence proves this and this assumption. Another element discards that or falsifies it, and you should come up with this kind of arguments. You might at the end then say, according to what I found out, this and this point is a good answer to the question. You don't say out of my stomach, but say based on this and this finding, I conclude that. I know that some of my academic colleagues don't like the word "I" in this word, in this work. I personally think if it's really important, you could use it, but as I said again, not make a general statement, but base it on what you found before. And then what I sometimes like in this master and conclusion, that you revisit your own work and say these were strengths and these were weaknesses of your work, and say, if the next researcher should deal with that in this and this way. So you should build the starting point of a new research.
So showing my own limitations for the next researcher. Actually.
Exactly. I think that's very good, that you realize, and you are sometimes the best person to realize, because you worked on it for months, is that you say, I should have known more about this and this part. I should have made more interviews in Ankara or more interviews in Brussels to get to this point. So I have some preliminary findings, but given the preliminary findings, I think this and this answer to the research question is relevant and valid.
Exactly, about the validity. Is it, should I analyze at the end if my theory actually matches my claims, or if my theory matches my data? Is that something I should bring into my thesis, or is it something I should be aware of beforehand and then talk and then?
No, I think it depends. Some use this empirical evidence, the cases, to verify or falsify the thesis or the theory as such. That's another way to do it. I would say if you find this and this answer, this means for the theoretical assumptions which you eliminate, that they were valid or not valid. And that people might think about additional ideas. So talk, instead of only intergovernmental approaches for the European Council, what might be a neo-institutionalist approach to the European Council. So you might add or show there might be other theoretical perspectives which are helpful. Or instead of just looking at geopolitics between EU and Turkey, look at functional cooperation between the two countries, etc. So you should tell the reader that you are aware of the limits and showing what might be added to your work.
Okay. And in what part of my thesis should I pay attention to the significance of the study? Should I come back to it at the end again? Should I say, so I conducted the study, or I wrote this thesis because this has like a great societal relevance, or because I filled a research gap? Where should I put this into, in the end or in the beginning?
Both. I mean, the first would be the motivation of your study. In the motivation of your study, you say there is a certain gap. As I said, be careful. You cannot expect too large gaps to exist. And at the end, you should say, apparently with this and this approach and with this argument and this empirical evidence, I think I could slightly fill this gap by this and this argument.
Okay. So if I got lost on the way, how can I bring myself back on track if I just like didn't calculate my time rightly, or if I have like a writer's block, how you say it?
The first thing is sometimes you take distance to your work. Go do some sports, go into a disco, talk with friends, with your family, whatever. Sometimes you need to have a distance, not too long, not for weeks, but for some distance. So sometimes overnight or in the morning, at least that's my experience with my own writings, you suddenly find a way. It floats into your head, into your brain. So it's sometimes strange how you get there, but so take a distance, I think that's important. Then talk with people, who you know, and explain. And sometimes just by explaining, even to persons who are not experts on your subject, you find, okay, then if I explain it to somebody, I see the links, I see what is missing. And also what I see quite often with students, with good students especially, that they're too ambitious. They want to do too much in too short a time. So one point would be then to reduce your own ambitions, to reduce what you really want to in empirical studies. And then tell at the end in the conclusions, I think this and this could be done, but given the time.
Oh, my limitations.
The limitations you can say. So try to reduce then your workload, because that's one of those points that, which is quite often a hindrance, an obstacle, that you talk too much, that you want to reach too much, or you are too uncertain about things. Talking to your professor, that depends a little bit, because there are different ways. I personally want to help students by talking about the structure and the major arguments, but I don't want to read chapters. There are some other of my colleagues who read chapters and help you by reading chapters. My own point is that students should learn their own way to do that, and not just listening to professors and then put into paper or on paper what they think the professor has told them. So I have a different strategy for that, and as far as I see, also this strategy works, because quite a lot of these works are quite good then. So it's not that you miss something, but you need to be on your own. That's my point. And that's something you will find at the end for your motivation. If you made it, if you handed it in, irrespective of the grade you get, you can feel, I made it. I did that.
On my own,
on your own, and you faced the challenge, and you got through all the valleys of your mood, and went up the hill again. So I think that's quite important.
Yeah, and very motivational. It's true. So concludingly, what is your do you have any hints for the audience, or for students like me? Like, what is the most important thing I should be facing, or I should be being aware of in writing my thesis?
Try to motivate yourself with a topic which is of high interest for you. This might be personal reasons, or your personal background, or you made a study trip to Turkey or to France, and you suddenly realize, France is an interesting political system. I don't know anything about it. Or Turkey has a lot of facets. There are quite a lot of superficial analysis, a lot of prejudices on Turkey. I want to study more deeply into that. So you need to have a subject which motivates yourself a little bit, and where you think, that's burning, that would be interesting to argue about it. And I think that's helpful. Ask, of course, your fellow students, ask the professor, but don't, let's say, just follow the advice of professors. At least that's my advice to students. Don't listen too much to me. Don't follow too much my advice. Reflect about it, of course. I mean, I don't talk just in vain on that. Reflect about it, but then if you think, oh, that's nevertheless a way which I think I can go, then do it. I found out quite a lot of times that reading at the end, I said, oh, I advised this person to stress more that or stress less that, and he or she said, no, I want to do that. And then I said, oh, that was well done, even though it was not following my advice concretely.